Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and we are joined once again by the one and only Dr. Ron Paul, a former congressman, host of the Liberty Report, and the man that made me a voluntarist. So thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Good to be with you again.
Now, let's go right into it. As the military-industrial complex continues to attempt to ramp up a potential war with North Korea, it seems a lot like a lot of people are eating it up on the left and the right. In a way, it's eerily reminiscent of Vietnam, except there are a lot more international players involved. Usually a massive calamity happens in order to convince the public to support a full-scale war. So do you think it's possible that a Gulf of Tonkin type false flag could bring the United States into war with North Korea?
It's always possible, but sometimes if you're always looking for a repetition of something in the past, it doesn't always happen the same way. So who knows what will happen? But the big thing that conditions the people is the propaganda. And it started, what you were mentioning has really started already. Republicans and Democrats keep talking about it. Nobody in Washington could take a position and say, hey, just forget about this guy. Leave him alone. He can't bomb us. He can't come over. He doesn't have it. So you're just making things worse. But no, there could be. I thought of that, of course, when our Navy was over there, probably still there, huge Navy. And not so much that you would need UN to do something. Maybe somebody else would do it on our side, as a false flag and blame him. That's always possible, too, because people who are determined to get a war going for all kind of nefarious reasons are willing to do that. That's something I did not want to believe in over the years, but eventually I came around to believing that even our own government's capable of maneuvering us into a war.
And I'd say you probably have a bit more leeway nowadays to talk about such things as when you were in Congress, you might have been just called crazy on the floor.
Well, I don't know whether I held back at all. I think the heat was pretty strong. It was especially strong running for president. There was nobody that was bashful about it. But I think that I try my best to analyze things and tell the people the truth. And it didn't cause me a great deal of harm there, because even the enemies usually didn't come at me like they were going to attack me. They tried to ignore me is what they tried to do. So, but I think that our effort and the effort that you make in trying to inform people, that's the important thing. And even when I was in Washington, that's what I was thinking about, was always trying to inform the people, because our government reflects what the people are thinking and what they endorse. And that's why, our educational system and the propaganda machine, our media, our movies, and our professors at school, all this is so important, because when the consensus is out there that we go to war, we usually end up going to war, and we have to combat that. Certainly there's been a consensus for decades now that Republicans and Democrats endorse the welfare state. They endorse, the Federal Reserve System. They endorse intervention in foreign policy. So we have to try to get people to back away from this involvement that we're demanding from our government to be involved in everything that we do in our personal lives or in the economy. Yeah. And that's where the battle is.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, how the media ignored you. You got ignored insanely during the 2008 elections and the 2012 election, especially. One of the first things I covered was the blackout on you. And that's one of the biggest differences when it comes to the media with you and Donald Trump, was that he was the quote-unquote anti-establishment candidate, but all the media talked about all day was him, which effectively helped him become president. And yourself, they just didn't talk about you. You'd win massive CNN polls, and they wouldn't even include you in the poll, which made a lot of people scratch their head and also actually support you more because they knew you were doing something right. But on the subject of North Korea, you mentioned, there's battleships there. They've just added now 3 major warships in the Gulf, and this would be the biggest show of force by military ships in decades. It's concerning to think that, when people don't believe the weapons of mass destruction thing regarding Iraq anymore, they'll think, well, maybe we can push this message of nuclear war, a nuclear holocaust, to get people scared enough to bomb a country they don't know anything about. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's what they're doing. I would have to still want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they don't have our Navy there and the 3 aircraft carriers and all the weaponry there with the idea that next month they are planning to attack. For a couple reasons. I think the one is that it would be so crazy, so foolish and insane, because they'd probably just wipe out Seoul, Korea, and the South Koreans are going to suffer the most. So, but that doesn't eliminate the accidents that can happen and get us involved where we are forced to retaliate. But it's just something that we don't need. Why do we expose ourselves to this? Why would we go looking for trouble when they are not a threat? But once again, it's a effort by the neoconservatives to keep the agitation going, and it might be somebody might make some money off these conflicts that we're involved in all the time.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of that subject, actually, recently Treasury Secretary Mnuchin threatened to cut China off the US dollar for disobeying US sanctions on North Korea, which of course would be a perfect storm for China as countries around the world swap out of the US world reserve currency. The IMF, which is looking towards using a centrally planned cashless system with the special drawing rights, has even announced a possible move to Beijing in the coming years. What do you think this means for the US dollar?
Well, on the long term, the dollar will end and it will no longer be the reserve currency of the world. But I don't think it's going to happen next month or next year, or whether China can pull this off. But then again, you don't know what kind of events are going to occur. There was quite a bit of chaos in '08 and '09 financially, but those QEs, the printing of and the creation of trillions, up to maybe $15 trillion, was able to calm the markets down to allow this system to continue. Next go around, it might be more difficult. But there will be no easy transition. I don't think that all of a sudden you're going to see China using another reserve currency. I think that's a little bit of politicking going on to try to claim they're getting a better deal, which is sort of the thing that Trump does. So I think the bigger thing is over the years, the dollar has been supported mainly by the Saudis, and it was been used as the petrodollar, and that can be attacked too, and that would make a big change because geopolitically things are in chaos over there, and we have always bent to anything that the Saudis wanted because they were able to bring down the dollar, and I do believe that the dollar had something to do with us going after Saddam Hussein as well as Libya, because both of them, said that they were going to use something other than the dollar. But the dollar is a big deal. I think the dollar will eventually destroy itself, or at least be diminished. I imagine the dollar per se will be around for a long time. But, there's still a British pound, although it's not the reserve currency of the world. So that is what I suspect would happen. It's ripe for some changes. It's actually, the transition is difficult to predict.
Absolutely. Well, as we always say here at WHAM, the fundamentals are off the table due to the level of manipulation in the monetary system. So you can't put a date on it. You just know it's going to happen eventually, because after all fiat currencies eventually revert to their intrinsic value of zero. They always have, always will, going thousands of years. But moving on from that, we've recently seen the rise of collateralized debt obligations, mortgage-backed securities, and credit default swaps to a level we haven't seen since 2007. Many housing markets in the United States are incredibly overvalued. Do you think we could see another housing bubble burst in large localized markets in the coming years?
Oh, yes, I definitely think so, and that's what's coming, whether it'll be exactly like the other one or as big. But you also have it in other areas. You have automobile bubbles. There's a lot of money owed on automobiles, a lot more than what the cars are priced at. But also the student debt. The student debt's not going to be paid, and someday there's going to be liquidation there. But yes, I agree that there will be another collapse in the housing market, because I hear the ads on TV already and radio is that no matter what your credit score is, we can get you in a house and there's no down payment.
How can people still believe all of this? It's unbelievable. And as you mentioned, the auto industry, there's auto-backed securities now. There's derivatives everywhere. Everything's debt-based, and it just seems insane that people keep falling for the same tricks.
Well, but think of it like a drug addiction. The drug addict knows that, this is not a good idea using drugs. Well, I need something. I want to, get a little bit of help. I feel better if I have a little bit more drug. The economy and the politicians feel a little bit better because the collapse doesn't happen tomorrow. And but they make the bubble, they keep blowing the bubble bigger. But it should not reassure people. But the fact that it's lasted a fairly long time makes people hope that it never comes. But it's more vulnerable than ever because so far interest rates really haven't gone up. I think prices are starting to go up again, and price increases have been hidden. They don't tell us how much really going on, but they're getting to the point where they're admitting, and that will drive a lack of confidence in the system. But right now, people are believing that this will last, and all we need is more spending. They still believe that no matter what they say in Washington. It's a bipartisan agreement. Deficits really don't matter, and that the monetary system doesn't need changing, that we don't need to, spend less money overseas in militarism. Otherwise, it would change. If they thought debt was bad, you and I might agree, this is serious. You got to do something before a big trouble. No, they don't think that, or they would do something. But that's why I think this process will continue until people lose total confidence. The whole thing comes down. The dollar will be lost as the reserve currency of the world, and people will resort to gold and silver as money to try to preserve their wealth.
Absolutely. The diversification of gold and silver, and of course, for a lot of people, Bitcoin as well, though I do stress that people diversify, is a great example of people moving away from the central banking system and saying, look, I don't believe in this system. I need to protect my family, protect my wealth. And of course, gold and silver, more than anything, is an insurance of wealth rather than an investment. And going into that, since 2012, especially, gold and silver has been severely manipulated by the hand of paper ETFs, derivatives, and funds like the Exchange Stabilization Fund. While physical sales continue to climb, the price continues to be kept down. How long can gold and silver be held down before bouncing up to its true value based on public demand?
Well, at the beginning of last year, gold was $1,000 and $1,050, and now it's almost $1,300. So it's up a couple $100. And I think they're in another period of time of steady rising, and it's going to accelerate as time goes on. I think of gold doing this for the third time in my lifetime, because I witnessed and was very interested in gold at $35 an ounce, and then it went from 35 to 800, and then for a long time it stayed way down, and then in the year 2000 it was $270, and it went to 1800, and then it corrects. But here last year it started back up again after 4 or 5 years of being in the doldrums. But going from $1,000, a little over $1,000 up to where it is today, I think it's in a third long leg upward. And that people will, it's just as well that people don't rush into it. I think the people who buy it now buy it and hold it for very special reasons. They know what's coming, but eventually it'll come back, and you'll see it being sought after by many. Right now, there are central banks like in China and Japan and these other countries are actually buying gold. It's the West, European nations and the United States, that has little concern about owning gold.
Absolutely. Well, hey, that's a pretty good deal you got there. A bit of a discount a few years back, but I mean, it's great. I mean, Bitcoin and gold and silver both show a great potential to be something that people will flood to when the markets or when the monetary system goes down, and we see that today. But I don't have much time left, Dr. Paul, so I wanted to finally ask. I have to ask. I'm not sure if you've spoken with him, but many of our viewers, as well as myself, want to know about how your son, Senator Rand Paul, is doing following the recent assault result. A lot of people are concerned. We saw that he returned to Washington yesterday, and I mean, most people can't recover that fast and hit Washington of all places. He obviously has a lot of encouragement, but what's going on with that? Do you have any comment on that?
Not much more than what I read in the newspapers. I've talked to him a few times, but there's not much you can say if you have broken ribs. You're hurting and you're waiting to get better, and he got better enough to go back, but he is still complaining that he's still having, a lot of pain. So it's one of those things. People want to talk about, the motivations and what was going on behind the scenes, and I really haven't talked to him about it. I think he's telling you the truth. I haven't even talked to this guy in 10 years. Yeah. And so he's probably as shocked as anybody about how did this come about, or why did it come about. He has no idea. He says, I can't be the determiner of what his motivations were. But he says, the only thing I know is my ribs have been cracked, and I'm dealing with that.
Well, what do you think of how the media has been covering it? I mean, there's articles coming out trying to justify being attacked by your neighbor because, well, maybe he grew pumpkins. I mean, what do you think about this nonsense?
Well, I think it's typical liberal baloney, and I think it's just terrible, because I heard one say Rand Paul has a lot of explaining to do. Why don't they say this guy that came on his property and broke his ribs and knocked him down, blindsided him? Why doesn't he have a lot of explaining to do? But no, it's just the politics that are going on. It's so mean and nasty and ugly. And I think all this stuff, whether it's on the tax bills and the bickering that goes on in Washington, it all represents the fact that the country is totally bankrupt. The system's not working well, and we're in worse shape than anybody realizes, and they don't have any answer, so that's why they're striking out, and there is a blame game going on. At the same time, philosophically, both sides have been responsible for the mess that we're in, and they won't admit it. The problem is government's too big. They're intrusive in our lives, they're intrusive around the world, and they won't admit that we're bankrupt, and they won't admit that the most important thing they could do for us is quit taking money from us, quit destroying the value of our money, and get out of our way and cut spending. That is not on the agenda, so be prepared for the coming events, which will be interesting, unfortunately very dangerous.
Sounds like they could use a lesson in the non-aggression principle. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Paul, for joining us today. We hope to talk with you again. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized by the Anti-Defamation League on YouTube, as they flag all of our content as hate speech. You can also find our Bitcoin address in the description and the comments, as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. You can also find me at Josh Sigurdson at steemit.com. That's steemit.com, the future of social media, as the dinosaur social media digs its own grave. You get paid in cryptocurrency, Steem that is, on steemit.com via the upvote of your posts, so I hope to see you there. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
Thank you.